Today is April 20th, 2018. My name is Daniel Ngo, and with me I have Sarah Davis, and we're interviewing Long Chu today. So, to start off, a simple question would be, where were you born?
I was born in Vietnam, in Saigon, Vietnam.
And what year was that?
1975.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, not 1975, 1967.
Okay.
1975 was when we left Vietnam,
So, obviously you grew up, you lived there for a few years before the war started. What was your childhood like growing up during that time period?
Sure. I remember clearly that I went to a French Catholic school, and I remember the nuns and how severe and harsh they were. I got into some trouble as a kid, probably talked too much or wasn't listening too much, and the nuns would sort of float down in their habits alongside and have the ruler to sort of whip you on your knuckles. So that's a very clear memory, but yeah.
You lived in Saigon. Do you remember any particularly bad days, bombings, and other things like that?
You know, it's interesting. Those memories come in flashes and sound more than visual. We lived far away enough from the main action of the war. My father was the medical chief of this hospital in Saigon, and so in the hospital compound, was our residence. So it felt safe, and there were walls and guards, and so I didn't remember much of actually seeing anything, but I could recall hearing bombings and thuds and sort of the distant sounds of the war.
Okay. Did any of your family participate in the war?
Well, my father was in the Army as an Army physician, but I think that in Vietnam it wasn't by choice. You joined the Army at some point, and so he did, and he actually that allowed him to finish his medical learning, and so that I think that's it. And it wasn't until later when I was older that I realized that my uncle, for example, my mother's sister's husband, he was a lieutenant in the Army before he became the mayor of Da Nang. And my grandfather, my mother's father, he was a general in the Army. And in fact, after the war, he was not able to escape and was put in re-education camp for about 12 years.
Okay. Do you have any siblings?
Yes, 7. We come from a large family, 4 boys, 4 girls. I am the third child, but the oldest son. Large family.
So I'm guessing none of the children participated because they were too young.
Yeah, we were young.
Okay, last question about your kind of childhood. What did your mother do if your father was
My mother was being a mother. She with 8 or 7 kids. The last one was born in America, actually. With 7 kids, she was she took care of us and the cornerstone of our family, so to speak. Yeah.
Okay, moving on to kind of immigration. How what route did you take to leave Vietnam and come?
Sure. That's an interesting story. As a poet, I write a lot about the Vietnam American experience, and like I say, a lot of it are memories, but not all mine, and so memories that I collect from hearing my family stories and all of that. But my father's sister's husband was a part of the South Vietnamese government. He was actually, his role was sort of like director of communications for President Thieu when Thieu was in power, right? Up until the loss of the war, and so through my uncle, we were able to leave Vietnam on a plane. I don't remember the details of that. It was a military plane, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I remember the day of the leaving, which was really, that day was clear in my head, because my sister and I attended that French Catholic school. My sister, that's just a year older than me. I think the name of the school is La Cinq Table, and it was during the middle of the day, maybe noon or so, and my mother had sent a car to retrieve us, and what I remember was that my sister running up to me. I was in the playground. My sister running up to me and saying, "Hurry, we gotta go, we gotta go." And what I realized later, and this is something that I learned later, was that my sister was actually looking for me for a long while, like 30 minutes or so. She couldn't find me, and in fact, the driver said, "We have to leave, and she said, "I can't leave without my brother," right? And so that was the sort of recollected memory that's not mine, but at least I remember that day. It was cloudy. It wasn't a bright day, and we got in the car, went to the house. I really don't remember taking anything or carrying anything, and there were several cars, and we all went to the airport. My parents, my siblings, my grandparents, and my father's sister's family, so my aunt's family, and there it was. We left. It was April 27, 1975. So it was a few days before the Fall of Saigon on the 30th.
Do you remember how you felt? You were pretty young back then, though.
And again, this is interesting, the sort of memory that we make. I'm not sure if I felt this way, but I could recall not knowing, and that feeling of the feeling of not knowing. It's sort of like this sense of, it wasn't dread, it was more excitement, right? As a young person, sort of like on a plane, sort of going somewhere. But I could recall, my parents' faces, worries, but again, I was maybe 6 or so, and young enough to remember, but probably not remembering the depth of the feelings. Though now, when I write about that day or some of the memories, they're much more expanded, of course.
So you already mentioned one of your relatives was left behind in a re-education camp for 12 years. Was anyone else, and were you able to be reunited with any of them?
Yes. So my what I learned later was that my uncle who got us out had the ability, or was given permission to take several family members out, but only immediate family members. And so my mother's parents, didn't make the list, and so they were left behind. Most of my mother's family had already left before then. Many of them actually were in America in universities and colleges and just stayed. My father has two sisters, so my two aunts on my father's side. One family left with us, and the other one left soon after, but through another route. Yeah. And so, immediate family members, I don't believe we had any except for my grandparents. And yes, they were. I remember growing up, my mother would send these shirts to my grandmother from America, and she would take the seams out from the bottom of the shirt and line it with dollar bills and fold it back up and mail it back and send it to my grandmother. It wasn't until 1985 that they were able to reunite with us. And then, after 12 years in a re-education camp, the communists, in their effort to re-educate, had broken my grandfather's legs, and so reuniting I remember very well. It was in LA, and my mom also comes from a big family. I want to say about 22 half sisters and brothers, full and half. So it was a big family, and so so when my grandfather was wheeled out in a wheelchair, I remember it was quite emotional. But yeah.
Okay. We read your poem "Dark Made Light," and you were saying that you drew from other people's experiences. So is that most of that just family experiences that were told to you?
Well, yeah, I think that now we're getting into the craft of writing and the craft of making, which is as a poet, there are things that memories that live in my head, but there are also memories that I have accumulated, and so they're my experiences. They're also not my experiences. They're the experience of the diaspora. They're the experiences of made up lives. So all of that. Yes. I mean, it's not an easy answer, I know, but it's the making of it, and we write from what we know or feel, and so yeah.
Okay. So when you took the plane from Vietnam, where did you end up landing?
So the path was Vietnam to Guam. I remember, we stopped at Guam because it was late at night, and I was hungry, and there was a military camp, and so I had milk for the first time, or rather, cow milk. So from Guam we flew to San Francisco, and in San Francisco, this again, the memories are vague. There's some clarity that we were in a sort of military base, and was there for maybe about a night or two, and then my father and my two aunts, so the three families, and my grandparents. So my other aunt took another route, but came to San Francisco at the same time, right? So the three families, through the refugee program at that time, had to be a sponsor family that take you in when you come to America. And so the sponsor family that took us in lived in Miami, and so we flew to Miami. My one aunt went to Chicago, and the other went to Lafayette, Louisiana. So from San Francisco, we flew to Miami, and we were there for a while, a year and a half or so.
And where'd you go after that?
So a year and a half in Miami was when my father sort of, I forget the name of the actual qualification test, but retook or study to retake the test to practice medicine here in America. And so all of that, and then he got I guess an externship or something at UTMB in Galveston. So we went to Galveston maybe 76 or so, or toward the end of 76. Stayed there, grew up in Galveston, and then moved to Houston in 1979.
Okay. Can you talk about kind of the culture shock, if you experienced any moving across the world?
Well, yes. I remember in Miami, I think many of the Vietnamese families were in the same apartment complex, and my parents knew many of the families. It wasn't terrible. I remember. So then maybe I was in second grade or third grade or something. Third grade. I remember the feeling of not being able to speak English. Mm-hmm. So that was definitely a clear memory, because I remember not being able to know how to ask to go to the restroom in class. My siblings and I and a few other Vietnamese kids, we took speech classes, maybe speech therapy, or ELA or something. But I remember the face of that teacher, but I can't recall her name. But the shock or the feeling of not being able to communicate, and then really, I guess because I'm a verbal person, I recall the slow accumulation of the English language. I can't chart out a path, but it's sort of like this sense of a growing expansion of oneself. So being able to learn how to communicate and all that. So yeah.
Do you think that contributed to your interest in poetry and
English? I think so. I think that's a great point. I think that I fell into reading very quickly, and I think it was through reading that allowed me to make a quick leap into absorbing the language. Also, I'll note that my grandfather and my father both spoke English, but not very much. But I do remember my grandfather. So we would go to school, and then after school we would go to his apartment, and he would sort of drill us in English, American alphabets and all that. And so I remember just sitting on the kitchen floor with my siblings, and he would have tutorial for us. But
where did you end up going to college?
I went to Houston Baptist University. I majored in English and psychology. It's interesting. I wanted to go somewhere else. I wanted to go somewhere far away. In fact, I was considering and actually was accepted to Amherst, and I didn't go. There's this fear, I think, and it's something that I grew up with, and I think it's part of the experience of being a refugee is the fear of leaving. Some can overcome that easily, but leaving means going away forever. And so, yeah, at least that's my feeling about it. And so, very afraid of not wanting to go, but wanting to go. And anyway, ended up at Houston Baptist University, which was great. And that was where I sort of really dug into poetry and writing, and then applied and was accepted to the UH Creative Writing Program, the University of Houston's Creative Writing Program. I say growing up, I was always an artistic person. I drew and painted a lot in high school, and visual art is still a space that I enter very easily. But the shift into using words that happened in college and blossomed.
Was there ever any pressure to kind of do what your dad did and pursue
medicine? Of course, and y'all would know that. I mean, this sense of I wouldn't say that I had the thought of wanting to be a poet or a writer. I think that for a long while through college and even through graduate school, I made efforts to do something practical. Study medicine would have been a practical thing. I thought that the next step maybe would be to be a lawyer because I'm good at writing. And I took the LSAT. I did fine, but I don't know. I knew I wanted to have a creative sort of life, and so I don't know. I just pursued it and went through with it and did writing. But yeah, that was not easy, trying to have a sense of self versus what your parents want for you.
Okay. And how did you end up working here?
So after the creative writing program at UH, I joined an organization called Writers in the Schools, first to teach writing in the classroom as a visiting writer, and was there for a long time, for 18 years. So a resident writer, and then I just did more work, became a program associate, program director, and became an associate director. Was there for 18 years. So all that time, really expanding my horizon about how to connect writing and poetry to other art forms, and working with many arts organizations in Houston, many arts institutions, to do collaborative efforts that would marry other genres with writing and poetry, and to get them to be understandable and exciting children, because the focus of Writers in the Schools is K-12. So I was there for a while, and the job opportunity came up here. The role of being a program officer for a historic foundation for Houston was never something that I sort of aimed for, but after a long time sort of working in the arts sector, thought that maybe this opportunity to look at the arts sector from an upstream kind of effort and thinking about making impact on the ecosystem in that way was very tantalizing. I threw my hat in the ring. I really didn't think I was going to get it, but I got the offer June 2015 and started then.
So we already talked a little bit off camera about it, but could you kind of briefly summarize what you do as
Sure.
Program Officer for Houston Endowment?
Absolutely. So Houston Endowment is a private foundation, was founded in 1937 by Jesse H. and Mary Gibbs Jones, and the foundation supports many sectors: arts and culture, education, environment, human services, and I'm missing something. Health. Sorry. So those sectors are encapsulated in our 4 focus areas. I am the program officer for the arts and culture portfolio, and what I do is I review applications, grant applications. I also work with the community to find entry points for right timing issues in the arts and culture sector, and then I make recommendations for our board to make their decisions. So it's grant making. It's it's not something that you sort of go to school for, but it's wonderful work, and I am excited and humbled by the way that artists have such passion and how they want to do their work. So,
okay, kind of jumping around, what did you
Sure.
think of Houston when you first came here?
Interesting. So I started middle school, and we went to we were in the Clear Creek ISD, I mean, I don't know what I thought of Houston. What I thought of school was this sense of not belonging, but wanting to belong, but also worked hard at belonging. I didn't have a sense of the city, really. It wasn't until college, and it wasn't until there was this moment. My father's medical office is was at St. Joseph's Medical Plaza. At that time, the Vietnamese community was just burgeoning. I remember the growth and development of the Vietnamese community along Milam and Travis, Midtown, before Midtown is Midtown now. And I remember the sort of constant mushrooming of Vietnamese stores and businesses. And, I just remember my father and mother sort of becoming more comfortable, and that made me more comfortable. There was one moment, I think I was walking to the grocery store. It was the first Vietnamese grocery store. It's where Reef Restaurant is at now. It's on McGowan. I remember walking into the the market coming out, and there's this truck that sort of sped by, and this guy kind of spat out the window and said, "Gook, go home." And so I remember that moment. That definitely filtered into my writing. It's not until college and after college, and especially working at Writers in the Schools, that I really have a sense of the city, the sense of Houston as this sort of this expansiveness. And I knew Houston because of WITS through school campuses that I visited and school campuses that we worked with. So I kind of got a sense of Houston through through the eyes of the students in these campuses.
Okay, so you were mentioning the person that kind of drove by and said whatever. Did you ever face any other sort of discrimination that you could think of, maybe in education or in your work?
Not in my work. Never in my work. I think that's, I don't know, the joy of working maybe in the nonprofit sector. I would say that I became more and more aware of microaggressions or moments of not understanding or purposeful not understanding. I don't know if if it was ever direct. Well, I don't know. I could recall some moments. I think the difficulty is mostly, having a foreign name, right? It's Bao-Long Chu. I remember the sense of every time in school, I mean, this is as early as possible, teachers sort of the first day going down the roll call, and I can always tell when it's my name because there's a stumbling, there's a pause, there's a looking around, there's a sense of making sense of Bao-Long, what to say. Sometimes the O looks like a D, and they would say, "Who's bad?" And so there's this fear and reticence of those moments. I could talk for a long time about that sense of the bifurcated self, the Vietnamese American. I do remember in high school dropping the G in long so that it's lawn, so that it is more understandable or Western. I remember that because I love watching late night movies, and I would stay up watching these old black and white movies, and there was one, these horror films with Lon Chaney Jr., and so his name was L-O-N. I thought, I can make that my name. But anyway, that didn't stay very long. I'm pretty stubborn about being who I am.
Okay, how have you seen Houston change over the years, both culturally and physically, and however?
Well, again, through work, through the world of work, and especially now in this role where we actually, as program officers and as a foundation, have this very wide and top view perspective of the city, right? That yes, the city has changed. I have a sense of that. 45 will always be under construction. So growing up in the Clear Lake area and sort of going south into downtown, that stretch of 45 has always been under construction. Will always be under construction. That part won't change. But the city has changed. The city has become much wider in its view. Food, for example, is much more representative. Well, not representative, very diverse, and I remember the early Vietnamese restaurants and just Vietnamese going but yeah, the city, Houston is amazing that it seems to want to make room for everything and anything, and I like that about the city. Yeah.
Okay, so you were talking earlier about how there was that kind of older area for where the Vietnamese people kind of settled.
Yes.
How has that changed over time? Obviously, more Vietnamese people have come.
Well, it's interesting you said that. So that area of Midtown was really Vietnamese Town, right? I mean, it was Vietnamese Town, and at some point, I remember maybe it was in the 90s or something, where the city put Vietnamese language or Vietnamese street signs, and in fact, I have an essay that sort of explored that. And so there was this sense of a community, a very specific location of what it means to be a Vietnamese, right? And living there. And I remember the migration as well of these Vietnamese businesses moving down to the Bel Air corridor. And because the city was changing, that area was changing, it became a sort of a hotspot to develop and live. And so now there's really nothing there. The sense of a Vietnamese locale is more spread out from 59 past the Beltway. So there's really not. That moment has passed. That moment of this Vietnamese enclave, that has passed. But it's a bigger city now, and so the sense of it being a part of the enmeshed in the city in a bigger way, I think that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it sounds like a lot of both your jobs have been kind of community oriented, but are you involved in any other community organizations?
No, not really. Not really. I mean, I my family is my community. I attend a lot of art functions for my job, but also for my liking. I care for the LGBTQ community as a gay Vietnamese. There's a sense of being on the edge as well. But yeah, So I belong to a lot of communities, but not necessarily in official kind of organizations.
That's fine. So going back to that Vietnamese-American, how do you personally identify? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting question, right? We should be able to name who we are. Vietnamese American is a fine label. I don't know if it says enough. I'm not exactly sure. I feel that I am firmly planted in two worlds. That I'm able, and lucky me actually, I'm able to navigate both worlds easily. I speak Vietnamese fluently. I go to Vietnamese temples. I feel very much a part of that, of being a Vietnamese. But also, I can switch code and be very American. I think it is a bit of switching code, so yeah, I'm lucky that I'm able to navigate both worlds with ease.
So you go to Vietnamese temple. Are you religious?
That's a good question. I am a spiritual person. Grew up Buddhist, but remember I went to a French Catholic school. and was sort of mesmerized by all the beauty of the trappings of the Catholic churches. I converted to Catholicism in high school. I remember telling my parents, and they were very upset, not because I am converting, but their question was, who will set up the temple to honor, the altar to honor us? Who will remember us, right? So the role of the eldest son, I think that is my role. And then I went to a Baptist school and was sort of, I dug into what that means, went to many Baptist churches with friends in colleges. And here I am, just sort of have all these experiences, these religious spaces, and loving them all, but knowing that that they don't provide all the answers. And just a spiritual person. I do believe in something. I'm not exactly sure what.
Okay. Have you been back to visit Vietnam?
I actually have. I went early. I got a when I graduated from the creative writing program, I received this grant. It was a wonderful grant. It allowed me to do some traveling to feed my writing, feed my poetry. And so it was in 1994, which was a long, long time ago in the sort of world of Vietnam now. And I went in 1994. I went with my younger sister. And I remember because in July 1994, I was there during the summer. In July 1994, at some point, President Clinton declared that there is normalization of relationships between Vietnam and America. And I was in Hanoi at the time, and they were going to make this announcement at the old American embassy in Hanoi. I remember that my sister and I went, and there was this sort of moment that I thought was really, really interesting, that I left, and here I am back in a place where my parents grew up, my parents came from, that I had never visited, and then there was this moment of America and Vietnam being friendly again.
Was that the only time you've been back?
That's the only time. I do need to plan a trip soon. Friends that have gone, my parents have been back, and they said things have just changed so quickly, and I'm excited to see what those changes look like.
Do you think there were noticeable changes when you went in 94 between 75 and 94?
I really couldn't tell you that, just because I don't, I had never been to Hanoi. That was the first time, and that at that trip, I did not make it down into Saigon. So really just Hanoi into Hue. And so, no, I had no sense of the physical changes of the landscape, but I did have a sense of being other than Vietnamese in Vietnam. There's a term, Viet Kieu, which means overseas Vietnamese, and I was called that. And so when I spoke Vietnamese, because my parents left Hanoi in 1952, when they, closed Hanoi off and split Vietnam into North and South, the way that they spoke Vietnamese was clearly an old way of speaking, and so I had adopted that. And so when I was speaking Vietnamese in Hanoi, a lot of people said, "Why do you speak in this old accent?" It was very interesting, because some of the words that I used that I learned from my parents, they don't exist anymore, or that they have changed. And so there was a sense of being Vietnamese, speaking Vietnamese, but not exactly being Vietnamese. And so I thought that was very interesting. Again, a great moment that sort of filtered through in my writing.
So a previous interviewee said that they think of Houston as home and Vietnam as their homeland. How do you feel?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure if I feel that Vietnam is homeland. I feel like my homeland is here. Though I know what that means. I know what the term means. I know that there's an easy rootedness, and I felt this when I was in Vietnam. I felt this when I visited, that there's a sense of being in the space that's sort of the space that knows you before you know it. There was a natural sense of belonging. But when I dug a little deeper into it, again, I told you this sense of speaking Vietnamese that's not the current Vietnamese. There's a sense of being other too. I think for my parents' generation, for example, perhaps Vietnam as a homeland makes sense. For us that were young, I would say, between 5 and 10, when we left Vietnam, I would say, and I'm not speaking for the collective, but I would say that in general, my thinking is that we live in both worlds and we are stuck in both worlds and that we are divided. And I don't think that division is I don't think there's a desire to unite the two halves. I think that living as two separate entities is actually something that specific generation, and I know Vietnamese American writers, poets, that we all speak in the same tone. Viet Thanh Nguyen, who wrote The Sympathizer that won the 2016 Pulitzer, his book is all about that. I know Viet and other poets and other writers, we speak in this split tongue. And I don't think Vietnamese Americans that are born here or that were much older when they left, I don't think that divided selves, I don't think that notion is as strong. My brother, who was born in Galveston, does not think of himself as Vietnamese. I don't think. I mean, he knows, he speaks Vietnamese really well. I mean, that's the greatest gift of my parents, that my parents gave us, was the enforcement of speaking Vietnamese at home and how we sort of lived in that language. So yeah, but yeah.
I just thought of another question regarding your poetry. Who do you write for? Who's your main audience, do you think?
Very good question. Who do I write for? I think I write for me. I think I write for me. I think I write about the earlier desire of wanting to heal the two selves, the separation. I think I write about, what it means to sort of live in the here and now. I also write for my parents. I write also primarily for my mother. She speaks English, but broken. And it's easy for someone to say, oh, you've lived here for 40 years, you should speak English very well. But, her role as a mother was to sort of be a mother and the space or the difficulty of negotiating living in America for my parents. Remember, my mother, she was about 29 when she left. Very young, very young. She had my youngest brother, Kit, her last baby, when she was 30. And so I also remember my mother having to work these odd jobs, peeling shrimp on the floor of the Hotel Galvez kitchen, and it's interesting. It's not like we grew up not without means, but the living of becoming American, I think that was harder for my mom, and it was safe for her to sort of live in the Vietnamese space. I think for her, this sense of me communicating her stories and all that. I think that I do right for my mom as well.
Okay. I just have a couple more questions. What do you do for fun? You said you like to obviously partake in various arts.
Yeah.
What else?
I said before that I paint and I draw. So I paint for fun. I'm not like this formally trained artist, but that's the space where I go to sort of be out of my head. It's less so with writing. That's much more difficult because it's so much for me thinking and editing. But what do I do for fun? I hang out with my family. My siblings, half of them are here, half of them are scattered elsewhere. I have a great group of friends. When you grow up gay, you also make another family. And so they're, again, this sort of divided selves. I have two families. And so, there's that. But yeah, simple things. I have two dogs. I love my dogs. Love walking.
Okay. And the last question I have is, what would you say your greatest accomplishment is so far?
I don't know if both of you feel this, but I don't know. I read this research recently that said a lot of minorities feel this sense of this fake identity, this faking that one has to do to sort of achieve something. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. That question actually is much more difficult than you would imagine. I would say that probably my greatest accomplishment thus far is to know that I have two selves and to love that fact.
Okay.
And the two selves are separated in many areas, but yeah, I think that is true. I haven't published a full book of poetry that has sat for so long, but a lot of my poems are anthologized in these various Vietnamese American sort of war anthologies or experiences anthologies, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud that my some of my sense of the world is out there for people to read and understand, and I'm proud of being here. I'm proud of doing the work that I'm doing. It's quite humbling and to be woven wove into this historic fabric of Houston, I think is really interesting.
Okay, so if Sarah has any other questions.
Yeah, I was wondering who some of your favorite poets or authors were.
It's always a hard question for writers to answer. This vast array of poets and writers. You know, sort of classic poets. I love W.H. Auden. I love Lee Young Lee. Mark Doty was teaching in the creative writing program. I didn't study under him, though I knew of his poetry. I love his poetry. Ed Hirsch was my mentor at U of H. Loved his. Writers, I try to read current publication as much as possible. I love Junot Diaz. I Vietnamese American I mentioned. But yeah, a huge list. I could sit here and think of a long list.
And I don't know if Daniel already asked you, where did you get your MFA?
At the University of Houston's Creative Writing Program.
And one last question I have is, how would you like to see Houston change or develop in the future? I think Houston has changed. Clearly, demographics have changed. The city is nearly 50% Latino. The Vietnamese population here is the second largest in the country as far as an expatriate community, second or third. The city has changed, and I think it's going in a great direction. I don't envision anything else. I don't envision Oz or anything. I think the city is what it is. I think that there could always be more access to resources that some of us, including me, take for granted. I think Houston loves its neighbors. I mean, I think that is true. We saw that in Hurricane Harvey, what happened after Harvey. But I think we could do better to understand and love each other's stories, maybe. There could always be room for improvement in that area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome.